Rodrigo Duterte's arrest sent shockwaves across the Philippines, but it was Vice President Sara Duterte's secret meetings and the sudden rise of General Antonio Torres that turned a political scandal into a high-stakes battle for the nation's future. What began as whispers behind closed doors quickly spiraled into a gripping story of power, betrayal, and a fight to control the next wave of Philippine leadership. Vice President Sara Duterte arrived in Davao City late at night, her flight unlisted on public schedules, her arrival kept deliberately low profile. There were no reporters at the airport, no flashing cameras, no welcoming crowd. Only a black SUV waiting at the edge of the tarmac, its engine quietly running. Accompanied by 2 close aides and a plainclothes security team, she moved quickly, keeping her head down and avoiding attention. Her destination was her father's private residence, a heavily guarded compound tucked away from the city center. Former President Rodrigo Duterte had been out of the spotlight for months. Since stepping down, he had retreated from national politics, making only the occasional public appearance. For a while, it seemed like the noise around him had faded, but those who watched closely knew that silence, in politics, was often a sign of something building beneath the surface. Sara's visit was personal, but not entirely unexpected. Yet what raised eyebrows was its secrecy. She usually traveled with fanfare. This time, even her office remained silent. Not even her official social media accounts acknowledged her location. The local police department had not been informed in advance, and even city officials seemed surprised when rumors of her presence began to circulate. Within hours, word leaked. A member of a security detail spoke off record to a local journalist. Soon, online chatter exploded. Screenshots of airport logs, traffic footage near the convoy, and even grainy images of the convoy began circulating. Questions spread rapidly. Why was she there in secret? Was her father ill? Or was something more serious happening behind closed doors? Some speculated it was a simple family visit. Others pointed to recent developments in Manila. Unconfirmed reports of a sealed indictment linked to Duterte's past administration. Whispers of legal movements had been growing louder, but nothing had yet broken into the mainstream. Back in Davao, the compound remained quiet, but surveillance drones, operated by curious citizens and independent vloggers, captured snippets of activity. Lights on late into the night. Unfamiliar vehicles coming and going, a satellite truck parked several blocks away, just in case something newsworthy happened. It didn't feel like a regular visit. It felt like the beginning of something. By morning, media outlets had picked up the story. Analysts debated the implications. Some warned against jumping to conclusions, but the public had already made up its mind. The vice president's quiet arrival was no coincidence. It was a signal. Something was coming, and it wasn't going to stay hidden for long. While the public still speculated about Vice President Sara Duterte's visit to her father, a storm was brewing in Manila, one that had been kept carefully under wraps for months. In a quiet corner of the legislative building, a sealed envelope changed hands. It wasn't marked as urgent, but everyone in the room knew its contents would shake the foundation of Philippine politics. Inside the envelope was a draft of an impeachment complaint. It named former President Rodrigo Duterte and listed grave allegations: abuse of power, obstruction of justice, and crimes against humanity, most tied to his controversial war on drugs. What set this apart from previous rumors was the detail. The document included specific incidents, dates, and newly unearthed evidence. It also carried signatures, not just from opposition lawmakers, but from a few names previously known as Duterte allies. The leak was not planned. A staffer, shaken by the implications, forwarded a copy to a journalist under the promise of anonymity. Within hours, headlines blared across news sites. Impeachment complaint against Duterte surfaces. It wasn't long before television anchors, legal experts, and political strategists began analyzing the document live on air. For many, it was surreal. Duterte had seemed untouchable for years. His influence extended deep into the military, police, and judiciary. But this document told a different story. A story of cracks forming beneath his once solid foundation. The question wasn't just about what he had done in office, but why these accusations were surfacing now, years after his term ended. Public reaction was mixed. Reporters dismissed it as political revenge, accusing rival factions of trying to destroy the Duterte name. Others saw it as long overdue accountability. Protests began to form on both sides, one group demanding justice, the other defending a leader they saw as a patriot. Inside government halls, things grew tense. The Senate went quiet. The House of Representatives debated in whispers. Even cabinet members of the current administration hesitated to speak openly. The leak had changed the game. Suddenly, no one wanted to be on the wrong side of history. Meanwhile, Sara Duterte remained in Davao, silent amid the rising tide. She gave no interviews, made no public appearances. Her silence only fueled speculation. Did she know about the document before it leaked? Was her visit tied to the growing storm in Manila? The timing seemed too perfect to ignore. One thing was clear: the impeachment complaint was no longer just a piece of paper. It had become a national event, one that would unravel secrets long buried and force the country to reckon with a past it had never fully confronted. 3 days after the impeachment draft was leaked, the nation woke to a scene few believed they would ever witness. Before sunrise, a convoy of black, unmarked vehicles rolled through the quiet streets of Davao City. Their destination, the private compound of former President Rodrigo Duterte. By 6 a.m., helicopters hovered above and uniformed officers from a special task force formed a perimeter. The streets around the property were sealed off. Inside, the former president was being taken into custody. The arrest was swift and silent. There were no handcuffs, no grand declarations, just a former head of state stepping into a van with heavy tinted windows, escorted by men whose badges weren't visible. Official reports confirmed he had been detained under an arrest warrant issued by a special tribunal, tied to the allegations listed in the leaked impeachment document. The charges ranged from ordering extrajudicial actions to suppressing investigations during his presidency. Footage of the convoy leaving the compound made its way to news outlets by mid-morning. It spread like wildfire across social media. Some were shocked. Others were triumphant. Still more were uneasy, unsure whether this was justice finally catching up or something more political. Government officials scrambled to control the narrative. The Department of Justice released a brief statement confirming Duterte's arrest, citing the gravity of the charges and new evidence brought forward. They offered no timeline, no names of prosecutors, and no details of where he would be held. The secrecy only fueled suspicion. Public reactions split sharply. Loyalists flooded the streets of Davao and Manila, waving flags and chanting Duterte's name. They called the arrest a political hit job, orchestrated by enemies who had waited for the right moment to strike. At the same time, human rights groups held vigils and marches, demanding full transparency and a public trial. Amid the chaos, Vice President Sara Duterte remained out of sight. Her office issued a single sentence: "The Vice President asks for calm and respect for legal processes." It did little to settle the unrest. Whispers began to circulate. Had she known in advance? Had she been given a chance to intervene? Was her silence a form of protection or quiet compliance? Being quietly driven away under guard marked the beginning of something deeper. His arrest wasn't the end of a story, it was the start of a new one, with consequences no one could yet predict. Just 2 days after the dramatic arrest of former President Rodrigo Duterte, another unexpected move shocked the nation. The Philippine National Police announced a new chief, General Antonio Torres. The appointment came with no prior media buzz, no shortlist debates, no ceremonial turnover. It was sudden, and for most people the name was unfamiliar. Torres had spent much of his career in the background, quiet, disciplined, and rarely featured in the press. He wasn't known for high-profile operations or flashy speeches, but within certain circles he had a reputation. Meticulous, loyal only to the law, and deeply connected to intelligence operations during the latter years of Duterte's presidency. Some even described him as a man who knew everything but said nothing. The timing of his appointment raised immediate questions. Why bring in someone so shadowy so soon after the former president's arrest? Observers speculated this wasn't just a routine reshuffling. Something about the way Torres was moved into position suggested preparation, perhaps even coordination with the legal process that had just been set in motion. Official statements called it a strategic appointment in a time of national transition. The president's spokesperson emphasized Torres's experience in high-risk counterintelligence and his familiarity with legal procedure, hinting that he was the right man to lead during what they called a season of accountability. But in the background, people whispered about Torres's connection to the Duterte family. Archived reports revealed that during Duterte's last 2 years in office, Torres had led a covert unit that gathered information on internal corruption and foreign interference. That unit was later dissolved and much of its work buried till now. Analysts on nightly news programs dug into Torres's service record and uncovered an interesting detail. He had been stationed in Davao during Duterte's mayoral years. Some began to wonder, was Torres loyal to Duterte, or had he been building something else entirely? Social media lit up with theories. Some claimed Torres had been pressured to turn over evidence in exchange for the promotion. Others believed he had been planted by those who wanted to make sure the investigation against Duterte stayed on track, no matter the political fallout. Torres himself remained silent. No interviews, no statements beyond the basic acceptance speech, where he pledged to uphold the rule of law without fear or favor. It was a line that could mean anything or everything. As the nation tried to understand the implications, one thing became clear. Torres wasn't just a new police chief. He was a key piece on the board. Whether he would serve justice or power, only time would tell. As General Antonio Torres settled into his role as PNP chief, a quiet operation began behind the scenes. Investigators, now with increased authority and political cover, reopened cold cases and classified files linked to the Duterte administration. Some had been shelved for years, others had never seen the light of day. What they found sent shockwaves through the inner circles of power. One of the most alarming discoveries involved a string of offshore bank accounts, registered under shell companies tied to names from Duterte's cabinet, business allies, and even suspected cartel figures. These accounts had been cleverly hidden, scattered across the Caribbean, Hong Kong, and Eastern Europe under aliases and forged documents. The money moved through obscure channels, often disappearing into real estate and luxury assets abroad. A task force traced one account back to a slush fund, allegedly used to finance covert operations during Duterte's drug war. This fund, it appeared, had been used for more than just anti-crime missions, surveillance payments, bribes, disappearances. Each transaction hinted at a darker network operating beneath the government's public face. Even more disturbing were files linked to individuals who had vanished during Duterte's presidency. Journalists, whistleblowers, even mid-level government officials. Names that had quietly faded from public attention. Now, documents showed that some of them had tried to expose the very corruption investigators were now uncovering. Among the recovered files was a folder labeled Project Echo, referenced multiple times in confidential memos. While most of its contents were missing, what remained pointed to a secret program aimed at identifying and neutralizing internal threats to Duterte's control. The existence of such a project was enough to reignite national outrage. Meanwhile, Torres's role became harder to define. While publicly he maintained a position of neutrality, internal leaks suggested that he had authorized several of the searches and arrests tied to the new investigation. Some believed he was finally cleaning house. Others feared he was simply replacing one power structure with another. The media struggled to keep up. Every day brought new names, new connections, new allegations. Talk shows buzzed with analysts trying to map the tangled web of influence. Opposition leaders demanded a full congressional inquiry, while Duterte loyalists claimed the entire investigation was manufactured, but no one could deny that something massive had been uncovered, something that extended far beyond one man. This wasn't just about Rodrigo Duterte anymore. It was about a system that had been built in shadows and silence and was now being dragged piece by piece into the light. As the investigation gained momentum, attention slowly shifted back to Vice President Sara Duterte. Her silence had become louder than words. While news of offshore accounts, hidden programs, and missing persons dominated headlines, the public couldn't forget the timing of her secret visit to Davao. It hadn't been a coincidence. Too many events had followed in its wake. Critics began questioning her role, not just as Duterte's daughter, but as a sitting vice president. Was she protecting her father, or was she distancing herself from what was coming? The lack of answers only deepened suspicion. Then came the leak that changed everything. A single photograph appeared online. It showed Sara Duterte meeting privately with General Antonio Torres in a secluded government facility, weeks before Torres was named PNP chief. There were no official records of the meeting, no media coverage, and no known reason for the encounter. The photo spread rapidly, and with it speculation erupted. Why had the vice president met with a man not even considered for the top police role at the time? Was she helping to engineer his rise, or warning him about what was coming? Theories flooded social media. Political commentators debated motives, and through it all, Sara remained publicly silent. The palace issued a brief statement saying the meeting was standard coordination regarding national security. But few believed it. The coincidence was too sharp, the timing too perfect, especially now that Torres was spearheading an operation that had reached into the Duterte family's legacy. Adding to the pressure, several members of Sara's political alliance began backing away. One by one, regional leaders and party officials distanced themselves from the controversy, releasing neutral statements or pivoting their focus to unrelated issues. The loyalty she once commanded seemed to be unraveling. Behind closed doors, intelligence reports began to suggest that Sara might not be as uninvolved as she appeared. Internal memos hinted at her knowledge of the pending arrest weeks in advance. Though there was no proof she had intervened, the suggestion alone was enough to stir doubts. Protests began appearing outside the office of the vice president. Some demanded her resignation. Others wanted her to speak, anything to clarify where she stood. But she gave no press conferences, released no personal statements, and made no public appearances beyond scheduled events unrelated to the investigation. As the country searched for answers, one thing became undeniable. Sara Duterte was no longer just a daughter caught in a scandal. She was a central figure in a crisis that was reshaping the nation's political future, and her silence had become a question no one could ignore. As the investigation reached deeper into the Duterte administration's past, the cracks in long-standing political alliances began to widen. One by one, former allies of Rodrigo Duterte started stepping away, some quietly, others in dramatic fashion. The first to go was a prominent senator who had once stood beside Duterte at every major event during his presidency. In a televised statement, he announced his resignation from the party they both helped build, citing a need for personal reflection. But his body language and choice of words made it clear he no longer wanted to be associated with what was coming. Then came a former cabinet secretary, long considered untouchable. He released a signed affidavit stating that he had been pressured to conceal financial records during Duterte's term. The document, now part of the official investigation, listed names, dates, and internal memos confirming that data had been deleted or rewritten to protect senior officials. With each new disclosure, more insiders began to come forward, not out of conscience, but out of fear. Fear of being the last one left holding the truth. These resignations sent ripples through Congress. A handful of lawmakers quietly deleted old social media posts praising Duterte. Others shifted their support to newer, rising political figures, especially those seen as distanced from the scandal. The once powerful Duterte bloc in the legislature began to fracture. Loyalty was no longer guaranteed, and survival instincts took over. In the streets, protests grew louder. Citizens demanded full accountability, not just for Rodrigo Duterte, but for everyone who had enabled the machinery of secrecy and abuse. Student groups and civil society organizations held forums and marches. What began as a legal investigation was evolving into a movement. And then, without warning, a new name entered the spotlight. A mid-level intelligence officer who claimed to have worked under General Torres during the classified Project Echo period. In a recorded interview, he described a chilling operation where internal threats, including dissenting voices within government, were surveilled, blacklisted, and in some cases made to disappear. He didn't say who ordered the actions, but his testimony made it clear the system had been deeply compromised, and those at the top knew. This revelation shook the public. No longer was this just about corruption or missing funds. Now it was about lives lost and voices silenced. Torres, facing growing pressure, promised transparency yet still refused to comment on the program. The silence left a gap that filled with fear, anger, and even darker theories. The country was no longer asking if something terrible had been hidden. It was now demanding to know how much had been buried, and who would be brave enough to uncover the rest. Just when the investigation seemed to reach a plateau, an anonymous envelope arrived at a major news agency's office. It was marked simply with a date and the words, "For your eyes only." Inside were classified documents, files that had long been thought lost or destroyed. The sender had remained anonymous, but the contents promised to change everything. Among the papers was a memo authored by General Torres himself, dated 3 years prior. It detailed a covert operation targeting key individuals who posed threats to the Duterte administration. The memo included witness testimonies, surveillance logs, and names that linked powerful politicians, military officials, and business tycoons. The chilling part was how methodical the operation appeared, with instructions for silence and secrecy. The memo revealed that Torres had been compiling evidence quietly, anticipating future moves. It showed that his appointment as PNP chief wasn't just about policing, it was about controlling a web of secrets. The files suggested he had access to information that could topple the highest levels of government, including incriminating details about Duterte himself. Journalists pored over the documents, piecing together timelines and connections. The memo described surveillance on whistleblowers, internal sabotage of investigations, and even interference with judicial processes. It painted a picture of a shadow government working to protect itself at all costs. This revelation deepened suspicions about Torres's role. Was he an ally of Duterte, working behind the scenes to shield the former president? Or was he a hidden adversary, collecting proof to bring him down at the right moment? Public opinion was divided, and every news cycle seemed to present a new theory. Political opponents seized on the documents to demand immediate hearings, calling for Torres to testify and explain his actions. The president's office responded cautiously, praising Torres's commitment to transparency but declining to comment on classified matters. Meanwhile, Sara Duterte's silence persisted, adding to the growing mystery surrounding the family. The leaked memo also stirred unrest within the police force. Some officers felt betrayed, accusing Torres of weaponizing intelligence for political gain. Others supported him, believing that uncovering the truth required tough decisions and sacrifices. This internal division made it harder for the PNP to present a united front. As the public digested the revelations, it became clear that the impeachment case was more than a legal battle. It was a strategic war for control. Torres held cards that could change the game, and how he chose to play them would shape the country's future. The line between justice and politics blurred, and no one could predict what would happen next. With the leaked memo and mounting pressure on all sides, the investigation into Rodrigo Duterte and his inner circle escalated into a nationwide crisis. Lawmakers scheduled emergency sessions to debate the unfolding revelations, while the Supreme Court prepared to weigh in on legal questions surrounding Duterte's detention and the legitimacy of the impeachment process. The entire country seemed to hold its breath, caught between hope for justice and fear of political chaos. As the hearings began, General Antonio Torres took the stand. His testimony was watched live by millions, and the weight of his words would echo for weeks. Torres spoke carefully, choosing his language to avoid outright accusations, but confirming that covert operations had indeed targeted key figures within and outside the government. He stressed that these actions were meant to protect national security, though he acknowledged that the line between security and abuse had at times been blurred. Torres's revelations implicated not only Duterte's allies, but also opponents. He painted a picture of a political landscape riddled with espionage, blackmail, and power struggles. The details were shocking. Secret recordings, manipulated evidence, and coordinated smear campaigns that had shaped public opinion for years. For Vice President Sara Duterte, the hearings were a turning point. Pressure mounted for her to address her role in the events. Finally, after weeks of silence, she released a public statement acknowledging her family's mistakes, but calling for unity and healing. She denied any direct involvement in illegal activities, emphasizing her commitment to moving the country forward. Despite her words, critics remained skeptical. Some opposition leaders accused her of being complicit or at least aware of the covert operations. Protests continued, demanding a full accounting and legal accountability for everyone involved. Meanwhile, the former president remained in detention, his health reportedly declining. Rumors of secret negotiations and backroom deals swirled. Some believed there were efforts to strike a political bargain, to exchange silence for leniency or protection for allies. Yet no concrete details emerged, fueling speculation about what was really happening behind closed doors. Amid the turmoil, public trust in government institutions hit new lows. Many Filipinos felt betrayed by those they had elected, while others feared the instability could lead to deeper divisions. The country faced a crossroads, whether to embrace transparency and reform or fall back into the cycle of secrecy and power struggles. As the impeachment process moved forward, it became clear that the fight was about more than one man or one family. It was about the future of Philippine democracy itself, and whether the nation could heal from a past filled with shadows and secrets. Months into the unfolding crisis, the impeachment proceedings reached their dramatic climax. The nation watched as the Senate gathered to deliberate not just on charges against former President Rodrigo Duterte, but on the fate of the country's political system. The atmosphere was tense, heavy with anticipation, as legal experts, media, and ordinary citizens waited to see if justice would prevail, or if the old powers would reclaim control. The evidence presented was damning. Documents, testimonies, and leaked files all painted a picture of corruption, abuse, and a deeply entrenched system that had manipulated the nation for years. Yet, despite the overwhelming weight of proof, the vote was not straightforward. Senators faced intense pressure from all sides: political alliances, public opinion, and whispers of personal risk. In the end, the impeachment trial exposed fractures that went beyond party lines. Some senators voted to convict, citing the need for accountability and the importance of breaking the cycle of impunity. Others voted to acquit, arguing that the process was politically motivated and could destabilize the fragile peace. The final tally was razor thin, and the decision sent shockwaves through the country. Rodrigo Duterte was convicted on several key counts, but acquitted on others. The verdict was hailed as a historic moment by human rights advocates and reformists, but it also left many feeling uneasy. The partial victory revealed how complicated justice could be in a system riddled with influence and power struggles. In the weeks that followed, General Antonio Torres announced his resignation as PNP chief, citing personal reasons and the desire to restore unity within the police force. His departure left many questions unanswered, especially about what secrets he still held. Analysts speculated that his time in office had been a balancing act between loyalty, justice, and survival. Vice President Sara Duterte, now under intense scrutiny, quietly shifted her political approach. She launched initiatives focusing on transparency and governance reform, seeking to distance herself from the scandal. Public opinion remained divided, but many saw this as a calculated step to rebuild trust and secure her future. The impeachment and its aftermath sparked nationwide calls for systemic reform. Civil society organizations pushed for stronger oversight mechanisms, judicial independence, and police reform. The scandal had revealed the dangers of unchecked power and the need for a government that truly served its people. As the dust settled, the country stood at a crossroads. The impeachment had exposed deep wounds, but also opened a path toward healing. Whether the Philippines would seize this moment to change or fall back into old patterns depended on the courage of its leaders and the vigilance of its citizens. The story of Duterte's rise and fall was more than political drama. It was a lesson in the complexities of power, justice, and the fragile hope for a better future.